You don't know whether it's good morning or good afternoon. I think we've just passed midday. So good afternoon to everybody. Mr. Chairman, my dear friends from all over the world who are here, assembled, discuss the issue of cultural diplomacy, focus on the Commonwealth. When Mark asked me to come and deliver an address here, I was, of course, very focused on the issue of the Commonwealth. And I wondered how many of the participants really know too much about the Commonwealth, and thought that perhaps I should myself avail of this opportunity to be able to say a few things about my experience with the Commonwealth, which initially will reflect certain weaknesses of the organization, before, of course, reserving some time to speak about some of the greatest achievements of the Commonwealth of Nations. Now, once upon a time, not very long ago, this city of London was the capital of the world, representing the greatest empire perhaps the world has ever known. It was, of course, the British Empire. At the time, the people of the British Isles, who had known poverty, supported the concept of survival of the fittest and invented such proverbs as necessity knows no law. Necessity is the mother of invention. These very island people, British people, worked hard by candlelight to invent what became known as electricity. And they took it journeys across perilous ocean to navigate, to explore and conquer as much of the world as possible. Among the islands they conquered were the Seychelles archipelago, lost in the middle of the Indian Ocean, not far away from home, which itself had been settled by their competitive neighbor, the French. I remember well growing up in the 1950s in Seychelles, and every year being taken to a square called Gordon Square, which had been named after General Gordon, who himself had conquered Khartoum in Sudan. Nostalgia may not be what it used to be, but I remember very well those days when, on the day called Empire Day, we were all young children taken to a square called Gordon Square, where we sang a song, a tribute to the flag of Britain. Flag of Britain, proudly waving over many distant seas. Flag of Britain, boldly braving blinding fogs and adverse breeze. We salute thee and we pray, bless, O Lord, our land today. If I remember well, try to recall the tune. Flag of Britain, proudly waving over the distant seas. Flag of Britain, boldly braving blinding fogs and adverse breeze. We salute thee and we pray, bless, O Lord, our land today. Sadly, however, when I got to London in 1957 to study law, the young British generation of Britain were not versed with that patriotic song. When I sang it to them, they were mostly surprised. And when attending a cinema in Amsterdam, and I stood at attention when the tune of God Save the Queen was being played, I was surprised to find myself the only person standing at attention at the end of the film. It's, of course, always easier to get to the top than to stay there. Complacency was starting to creep up into the social and political fabric of the British people and threatening their resolve to remain at the top, to remain great. The businessmen and industrialists who had conquered the world with their exports of made-in-England commodities and whose lunch, initially at the office, comprised of English sandwiches, a cup of Bovril, Marmite or Ovaltine, were quickly getting used to French-style business lunch with hors d'oeuvre, main dish, dessert, etc. All the absorption of very good quality French wines, and then their cheese, they would take that with good quality port from Portugal. Of course, success brought some arrogance to certain people in Britain, whilst the world of envy also started to cry and scorn against imperialism, and the cry for independence and self-rule started to be heard from the east, from the west, from the north, and from the south. In order to secure a lasting memory of the days when Britain truly ruled the waves, this great nation of diplomacy and advocacy lost no time in promoting the concept of the Commonwealth, initially styled the British Commonwealth. The Commonwealth instrument was, of course, often used for gainful purposes as well. When I was growing up in colonial Seychelles, the import tariff was divided in two sections. One, the Commonwealth section, and the other was the foreign section. The import duties on goods made in the Commonwealth was to the extent of 17%, as opposed to 40% on foreign made. Briefly, if you imported a car made in UK, this would bear a rate of 17% duty. But if you brought one from Japan or from Germany, you would have to pay a rate of 40%. And surprisingly, 90% of the cars in Seychelles came from the United Kingdom. The Commonwealth was also an instrument to perpetuate and to promote the English language across the world. Also as an instrument to make the Commonwealth nation see history in the British way. As a young student at Seychelles College, one of the subjects I took for advanced level for school living certificate was the history of Canada. Our textbook was from Oxford University Press by an historian called Newton. Ironically, my history teacher at the Seychelles College was none other than a French Canadian. Not unexpectedly, he had been taught French-Canadian history, and his version of it was totally adverse to that of Newton. Now, since our exam papers were to be corrected by people in Oxford, I made the wise decision to stick to my textbook rather than the version of my history Canadian teacher. As is often projected, history is, of course, always written by the victor. And let us not forget what Napoleon Bonaparte said about history. He said, it is a set of lies agreed upon. That, of course, was Napoleon, not a good friend of the British. At the time that I was about to leave Seychelles to go and study law in London, my father wrote in a little book, which I carried with me, the following words: "Pray to your God and honor thy queen. Never be penny wise and pound foolish. In fact, if you take care of the pence, the pound will take care of itself." Embedded with such pro-British sentiment, it was of course not surprising that on the basis of the devil we know is better than the one we don't know, that when I returned to Seychelles and got involved in the island politics, I advocated that Seychelles should retain its association with the United Kingdom, preferring that we evolve into a status like that of the Channel Islands, rather than becoming totally independent. I saw Britain as a godfather to our little nation, just as France is today the godfather to the island of La Réunion, next door. Unfortunately, Britain at the time was all bent into entering the newly elected common market of Europe, which eventually became the European Union, all at the expense of the vast collection of small islands which she had conquered over many years, and where she had installed a highly respected civil service. Following Prime Minister Harold Macmillan's winds of change speech in South Africa, Westminster spelled out the United Kingdom's policy with respect to the question of independence. The UK government stated that it stood ready to give effect to the wishes of the colonial people, but in practice, Britain did not live up to this commitment. As and when the colonial people voted for independence, Britain lost no time to see to it that it became an independent sovereign nation. But when the people, like in the colony of Seychelles, voted for integration or close association by a great majority, Britain would not bring this about, because entering Europe at the time had become the order of the day for the United Kingdom. Nonetheless, as and when Seychelles was forced by virtue of this British attitude to become an independent nation, our Legislative Assembly became full member of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, and Seychelles was also accepted and admitted as a full member of the then British Commonwealth. A more important story to recall is that I had come to London to attend the Commonwealth Heads of State Conference in 1977, when the Seychelles coup d'etat took place, which was in fact the rape of a constitution which had been agreed upon 2 years before in nowhere else than Marlborough House, which was the headquarters of the Commonwealth. I was therefore shocked when on the day of the coup d'etat here in London, when Commonwealth Secretary General Sheddat Ramphal turned up at the Savoy Hotel, where I was guest of British Commonwealth for the summit, to plead with me not to turn up at the Commonwealth opening ceremony, as several leaders attending the summit were also products of coup d'etat, which could have made things very embarrassing, as the summit coincided with the celebration of the Silver Jubilee of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. In fact, only a day before, in my capacity as leader of the newest nation that had joined the Commonwealth, I had been invited to deliver a keynote address at the opening session of the summit, and had, throughout the day before, been working on my speech. The Secretary General, however, agreed that I should be invited to address the group in a session that would follow the opening ceremony. That invitation never came, much to the disappointment of three of my great supporters within the Commonwealth at the time: Prime Minister Ramgoolam Mauritius, Pierre Trudeau of Canada, and Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore. From then on, I heard nothing more from the Secretariat of the Commonwealth. After being greeted, before me, therefore, was a picture of hypocrisy, duplicity, and readiness at all times to sacrifice principles for expediency. As a matter of fact, Secretary General Rumford, who had been our guest at our independence celebration in 1976, saw it fit and proper to be the official guest attending the anniversary of the coup hosted by the dictator who had established a one-party state just 2 years before. It is ironical that in 2012, I was deposed as president in 1977 when I came to London to attend the Commonwealth Summit, which coincided with the Silver Jubilee of Her Majesty, that I was asked by the actual President of Seychelles, James A. Mitchell, to represent him at the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee celebrations. One of the great events organized for the Jubilee celebration was a luncheon at Marlborough House, the same place where we had drafted the Seychelles Independent Constitution, hosted by then Secretary of the Commonwealth in honor of Her Majesty. I arrived in Marlborough House well on time for the occasion. I was greeted on arrival by concerned Secretary General. The fact is that Sri Lankan Tamil political refugees in UK were staging a demonstration outside Marlborough House, decrying the fact that the Sri Lankan president had been invited to the event. After being greeted by the Secretary General and with a glass of champagne in hand, I went on a rediscovery of the main hall of Marlborough House, where the luncheon was to be served, which had served as the hall where we negotiated for our independent constitution. I went around, center table, where Her Majesty was to be seated. On the right side, to be seated next to her, was none other than the President of Sri Lanka, whose nation was to host the next Commonwealth Summit. And the left side was, of course, reserved for the Secretary General of the United Nations. The table where I was to be seated had placed the Prime Minister of Mauritius, Sir Navin Ramgoolam, on my right side. But things changed so fast within the Commonwealth. When sitting time came, I found that the President of Sri Lanka had been abruptly demoted. Sir Navin Ramgoolam had been removed to sit next to Her Majesty, and an unhappy Sri Lankan President, Rajapaksa, had been sent to sit next to me. Whether this was the decision of Commonwealth Secretariat or a last-minute directive from Buckingham Palace, I wasn't too sure, but President Rapsiraka was certainly in a sulky mood for being slighted at such short notice. Well, since Sri Lanka hosted the last Commonwealth Summit, which Her Majesty didn't attend, but sent Prince Charles, Prime Minister Cameron attended as leader of the British delegation and made it a point to criticize the government of Sri Lanka when he was in fact guest of that government. These background stories about my displeasure with certain attitude within the Commonwealth, I think was very important. I had to find an occasion, as they said, to spit it out. Notwithstanding these sad, if you want, criticism of the Commonwealth is one of the greatest organizations today and has a very important role to play in the context of the promotion of cultural diplomacy. It's about 59 nations, 32 of which are small island states, but with a total of about 2.2 billion people. However, the Commonwealth is very involved internationally. It has a Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. It has programs to do with human rights, program to do with health, education, and in fact has certainly really been helpful to many nations throughout many parts of this world. But perhaps the most important contribution which the Commonwealth has made throughout my lifetime, when I was living in exile in England, was a stand which the Commonwealth took at the summit meeting in the Bahamas against apartheid. The Commonwealth was fully united. It was very difficult to get the British government at that time, a conservative government under the leadership of Mrs. Thatcher, to agree to the boycott of white South Africa. Because as we do remember, British investments were the top investors in South Africa. So the pressure from UK was very tough. However, eventually, they saw that this issue could have really brought about an end to the Commonwealth. And the British government also decided to support the boycott suggestion that was on the order paper. Now, all the stories I've painted about the Commonwealth is not surprising when you think that it's like a huge family. And today, you know, there are so many internal problems within most families. So one should not, if you want, always allow the past to blind you from the good things which the organization is doing. But perhaps the most important point about the Commonwealth, what has kept the Commonwealth together? Well, nobody else but Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. She has been head of the Commonwealth and she continues to be. Of course, there's always a question after Queen Elizabeth II, would the new leadership, the new monarch, be able to maintain that affinity, that respect, that love and affection which Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II enjoys today. Thank you. Your question is a very interesting question. But let me first introduce the fact that one of the reasons why I wanted that we remain with the United Kingdom was the fact that next door we had the island of Réunion, where the French had declared it was a French overseas territory. By virtue of this special dimension with France, the people of La Réunion Island was benefiting some same level of social security as the people of France. They had the same passport and they had the same money, which was euro. Whereas in Seychelles, we don't know where we're going with our Seychelles rupee. Interesting, during the Second World War, and that is something which many people also, perhaps in UK also sometimes overlook, is that these small islands also contributed towards the challenge of World War. In Seychelles, for example, out of a population of about 85,000 at that time, 2.5 well-bodied men, health, were taken, stationed in Egypt to fight for Queen and country. I wonder whether these people really know where they were going to leave Seychelles and to go to the desert of Egypt. At any rate, this past story. But the point is, what I was trying to make is, suddenly we had a situation where our cousin in Mauritius, in Réunion, could come into England or France whenever they wish, because they were a member of the European Union. But the Seychelles citizen at that time, who had fought under the British, themselves they find that it was then impossible for them, without getting a special visa, to enter UK. Of course, your question is very interesting, a choice as to whether one should join the Commonwealth or Europe. That's a big question, taking into account the cross currents existing today in European politics. I believe that the world needs a strong Europe, very badly. If Europe is to remain relevant, if we are going to be able to compete and stand up to BRICS nations, to mighty nations like China, like India, like Brazil. China, when you think about Europe now, Bulgaria, 16 million people, one Chinese province, over 100 million people. So what are you going to do with all these small nations if they don't realize, in my view, the need to remain as united as possible? But the Commonwealth happens to becoming more and more a loose organization. Okay, everybody recognizes, respect of the Majesty head of Commonwealth, but as you know, only a few years ago, the Commonwealth admitted Mozambique and then Rwanda as also members of the Commonwealth. Where lies the common denominator for Mozambique and Rwanda? The other common denominator, they were all ex-Anglo or British colonial nations. I think it will be very difficult for me to answer tomorrow if we had a choice. I don't think it should be exclusive. We should try to belong to both, and hopefully both of them will improve their performance and give us all a bit more hope for the future.